Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Today we're digging into the system of the self by looking at a book that reveals a hidden sickness called despair, and it argues this isn't just an emotion, but a deep structural flaw in our identity that's quietly shaping almost everything about modern life. So let's talk about Søren Kierkegaard's The Sickness Unto Death. It was published way back in 1849 under a pseudonym. And right off the bat, you gotta know, this book isn't about physical illness at all. Nope. It's about a profound and pretty universal condition of the human spirit. Okay, so here's Kierkegaard's really radical idea. Despair isn't something we occasionally fall into. He says it's our default state. And here's the kicker. It's often most present when we feel perfectly fine. A life of total security, he suggests, can actually be the perfect hiding place for this sickness. When he talks about despair, he doesn't mean sadness. It's not an emotion. It's a fundamental misalignment, a deep imbalance right in the very structure of who we are. It's a sickness of the self that actually comes from the self. Kierkegaard imagines the self as this kind of synthesis, right? A constant tension between two poles. On one side, you've got your limitless potential, your imagination, what he calls the infinite. And on the other side, you've got your concrete, real-world limitations, the finite. Despair is what happens when this balancing act breaks down. If you lean too hard into the infinite, you're just lost in fantasy, totally ungrounded. But if you lean too hard into the finite, you lose all that potential and just become another number in the crowd. Now, this whole idea of misalignment isn't just a theory. It actually shows up in some very specific patterns, and Kierkegaard points out a few forms of despair that are usually hiding in plain sight. The most common one? He calls it unconscious despair. This is the person who's so completely absorbed in the daily grind, their job, their status, all the worldly stuff, that they've lost any connection to their deeper spiritual self. They're not really living anymore. They've just become a repetition, a cipher. Then you have the despair of weakness. This person is actually aware that there's a deeper self, but they're completely paralyzed by the feeling that they can never become it. They see the potential, but they just shrink away from the responsibility that comes with it. And the most intense form he talks about is defiance. This is the self that basically says, I'll do it myself. It rebels, trying to be its own master, its own creator. It wants to build an identity completely from scratch, rejecting the very foundation that put it here in the first place. So what does this kind of structural problem actually look like? How can we picture it? Well, he gives us this really powerful metaphor. He asks us to imagine trying to build your whole life, your entire sense of self, but without any solid ground underneath. A self that tries to define itself purely by its own willpower, without being grounded in anything, is like a building with no foundation. It might look impressive for a while, sure, but it's inherently fragile. It's bound to collapse because, as he says, beneath it all, there's nothing. In this idea, this concept of a hidden structural sickness is exactly what makes his work so deeply unsettling and, honestly, so incredibly relevant today. So here's the really crucial point. This loss of self is often completely invisible. I mean, if you lose something external, everyone knows. But this kind of internal collapse, it can happen so quietly that no one, not even you, might realize what's going on. It really challenges us to rethink our own anxiety and that feeling of unease. What if they aren't just psychological bugs that need to be fixed? What if they're actually signals pointing to that deeper misalignment? Maybe the sickness isn't just a flaw. Maybe it's a clue, showing us the way to a more authentic way of being. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. What if our endless modern pursuits, our busyness, our careers, our constant search for happiness, what if they're all just really sophisticated ways to distract ourselves from this fundamental sickness of the self? For the full, long-form deep dive into this book and its ideas, follow the link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.